Good, good. Are we awake? How was that traffic this morning, huh? Woohoo! We all invigorated? We've all said our bad words for the day? Oh my gosh. So if you want to just grab some breakfast, have a seat, we're going to get started. I'd like to welcome you. I'm Aggie Malter. I'm the Executive Director of PAISBOA for any of you who are new to this happy group. Who here is not a member of the Business Insurance Group? Any schools here? And what school are you from? Okay. All right. And you're from? Great. Well, thanks for joining us this morning. We appreciate that. This is a great program and just one of the many benefits of being a part of the Business Insurance Group. I know that some of you know a lot about the group. Some of you don't know so much about the group. We have some board members here this morning, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank the leadership of the Business Insurance Group, in particular Mark Murray, who's our chair. Mark, you want to stand up and let people know who you are? Thank you for your service. And I was looking around the room. We have a good crowd here from our group, and you'll meet some of them later on. But I wanted to just put in a plug for the Business Insurance Group. This group is all about managing risk and educating you about your risk. It's also a great way to bring some stability to your insurance costs. So by being a part of this group, you're making some very smart decisions. You are, getting together with a group who can negotiate good rates, but also, bring some stability and some knowledge to the risk for your schools. It also enables you to be protected from the impact of great risk when your school does have a claim. So the group does, work as kind of a shock absorber for that. So there are lots of interesting things that we're going to share with you this morning. The folks from Willis are here in full force to answer any questions you have about the program. And I'm going to turn over to John, who's going to introduce our speaker for this morning, and thank you all for being here.
So good morning, and thank you for having us here today. I'm John Sherlock, and I'm the head of corporate risk and broking for the Greater Philadelphia operation for Willis Towers Watson. First, we're honored to be here. We're so happy, right, that for the past 20 years, that our team has handled risk for the insurance group. So we appreciate that opportunity to serve you, and we do that with a lot of hard work. Most of that hard work is sitting at the table behind here, and certainly under the leadership of Hall Vetterline and Reed Sander in the back, as well as Bob Polini. So really appreciate all the work, and we appreciate you coming to talk to us today. What we have here today is a combination of experts from Willis Towers Watson, as well as Mullen & Coughlin. A renowned law firm, not just happen to be based here in the Philadelphia area, but on a national scope, handle defense work on behalf of many of the insurance carriers when they have cyber claims, right? So they are well recognized in the insurance industry. And we wanted to bring that expertise to you here today. And under the leadership of Joe DePaul out of our New York operation that runs our North American practice for our cyber practice. So we have great expertise to bring to the table, which is why I will then leave the podium so that you can hear from that expertise. But I wanted to briefly have our panel introduce themselves. And Joe DePaul.
Thanks. I guess we should stand here because this is being taped. So anyway, folks, I'm Joe DePaul. I run the cyber practice for Willis Towers Watson here in North America. Happy to be here. Look forward to, I think, what will be a very interactive discussion. And just before we get started, please help us make this interactive. Ask us questions. Stop us. Let us interact with you. There's a lot of material in the presentation. I think you'll find it very, very educational and informative. So stop us and ask questions as we go on. So, Jim?
Thank you, Joe. Let me tell you a tiny bit about myself and the firm. I'm Jim Prendergast. I'm a partner at Mullen Coughlin. We're a data privacy firm. So the enormous majority of what we do is assist clients that have had a data event, a data breach, a data compromise, a lost laptop, ransomware attack, phishing attack, anything that might compromise the confidentiality or security of your data. That's all we do. It's all we do all day, 7 days a week. We have a 23-attorney firm. So if you ever had a question, a concern, a worry that was lodged in the back of your head, shake it loose this morning and ask Alex and I. No question, too smart, too dumb, or anything in between. We're data compromised, data privacy attorneys, okay? And it's all we do all day. We have no other practice groups or interests. And we've represented clients that have been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal and clients that have mismailed one W-2 that resulted in a data breach. We've had many, many education clients, universities, large and small, public schools, private schools, all sorts of education clients, because education clients tend to be a veritable treasure trove of PII, which we'll get into a little bit later. A tiny bit about myself. I'm a Radnor High graduate from the 70s. I actually taught at the Haverford School for a few years I was an undergrad at Penn, between my undergrad years and law school. My wife's a Baldwin lady from our bygone era. So I have a feel for private education in the Philadelphia area. Our law firm is in Wayne, just a few short minutes from here. So we're happy to be here. And if you have any question at any time, shout it out. Much happier to have as interactive an audience as possible. Thank you.
And Alexandra, right?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alexandria Murphy, and I am an associate attorney and have been for the past year at Mullen Coughlin with Jim.
So on we go with the program, and once again, thanks for having us. Please probably be patient, as I think every access road to Radnor was shut down this morning by a car accident. So I'm sure that we'll have more people coming in. So thanks once again for having us, and I'm going to turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, John. What's that? 17 years of college, and I can't. Still can't work a clicker. Okay. So again, let me encourage everybody to shout out questions, okay? I'll try to start at a high level, and we'll dive as deep as you want to dive. I'm never entirely certain the experience or the depth to which our audience is involved in cyber compromises. As the head of the Department of Homeland Security has said again and again, both in this and the previous administration, there are two kinds of entities out there, those that have been compromised and those that will be compromised. Regrettably, that's the world in which we live. So you need to prepare for a data compromise because, like it or not, it will almost certainly happen in your career, and it's a trifle fortuitous if it only happens once. Okay? Once again, I get it wrong. Okay. So let me start at the highest possible principle. Not every hack or not every compromise is a significant event, okay? Those hacks and compromises that are significant events that will take up a lot of your time and energy are those events where certain kinds of data is compromised, okay? So you have to know what kind of data you have, and you have to know where it is. So I will sometimes use the word PII or words PII, personally identifiable information. There are 48 states in the union that have data breach notification statutes. Pennsylvania is among them. The two that don't are Alabama and South Dakota. Okay. Every other state in the union has a data breach notification statute. They all use the concept of PII, personally identifiable information. If your PII is lost, stolen, or accessible to an unauthorized actor, a thief, a hacker, call him or her, whatever you want to call them, you probably have a notice obligation. So what data you have is the crucial first directional step in your analysis. If you've had a compromise or a hack and its name and postal address, you almost certainly don't have a notice obligation. There are certain other kinds of data which are confidential, particularly for our education clients, which also don't trigger a notice obligation. So the concept of PII is crucial. What kind of data do you have, and where is it? The simple reality is that most of our clients don't know exactly what data they have and where it is. And that's because everybody works hard, systems change, software changes, databases are opened and closed, used and not used, archived and not archived, archived securely and not archived securely. And so sometimes our clients have a compromise only to discover that a database that wasn't used except 3 headmasters or headmistresses before was compromised, and it's chock full of student name and social security numbers, and everyone is shocked and horrified that you have 15,000 names and social security numbers on a database that nobody had worked on for 15 years. So what data you have and where that data is are crucial directional questions, okay? Yes, sir. That's a great question. So the question was, what about paper records in old filing cabinets in a basement, which, by the way, every law firm in the world still has, okay? I don't know whether education clients do or not. I suspect they do. Hospitals are getting better at it. The simple answer is most states do not require a notice obligation when paper records are compromised, okay? Most states do not require. That may be evolving slowly away from that. I also can't help but note that most of our clients have, over time, digitized their paper records. Many of our education clients digitize their records for the facility with which they can access those records and reach out to alumni, either for foundational giving or for the homecoming game. So, but the simple answer to your question is the hemorrhage, the unauthorized leaking of paper records usually does not trigger a notice obligation, but be careful about whether those records have been digitized or not. And a separate question is, should you notify? So say, for instance, you have a file cabinet in the basement that nobody's accessed since the Eisenhower administration, and it has all the names and social security numbers of students of a certain era and their children. And those records become, are stolen or accessed or thrown out when you move a building, when you move to a new building. Do you have a notice obligation pursuant to the Pennsylvania Data Breach Notification Statute? No. Should you notify them? Well, probably yes, because name and SSN is kryptonite to an identity thief, and that's exactly the trade in which they ply their craft. But that would be an optional decision on your part, a business decision, an alumni relations decision, more than one triggered by a notice obligation. Anybody have any thoughts or questions on that? A good question, and most of our education clients have copious amounts of paper records, okay? And I'll try to move a little quickly here. We have a lot to talk about. Who can access it? Good protocol is to have sets of controls as to who can access PII. To be perfectly candid, if all faculty can access name and SSN, that is almost certainly a bad protocol, okay? If you have certain controls and protocols that limit access to PII, you're almost certainly in a much better position. If there's a lot of access to PII, all it takes is the compromise of one teacher or one administrator or one assistant, and if the intruder can navigate their way to the PII, you have a problem. If you limit it to a core group of people with high administrative credentials, and those folks have two-factor authentication, the risk of compromise goes from this to this, okay? Do you purge it, and how should you purge it, and when should you purge it? From our perspective, you should purge everything you don't need that has PII. Most of our clients, like most folks, want to hold on to stuff that has some sort of attachment to them. And most of our education clients have an attachment to their alumni, and sometimes have an attachment to their former faculty. So lots of our education clients will hold on to data, and so the simple answer, it's not always easy to operationalize. The simple answer is, if you have PII but you still want to use it, either encrypt it or truncate it so that it's not something an identity thief could use. For instance, rather than keep full SSN, keep the last 4 digits. okay? And keep a postal address for your alumni or your former faculty. If you don't need it, the general rule is don't keep it. If you don't need it and you get hacked and 50 or 100,000 PII records go out the window, you'll rue the day that you didn't sweep it out. Okay? Yes, sir.
So in different states, is the definition of PII different?
That's great. Alex, do you want to touch on that?
Sure, we also have a slide on a little later.
Okay. You want to talk about it now?
Sure. All right, so 48 of the 50 states, as Jim mentioned, do have a data breach notification law. There's a standard definition which many of the states adopt, which would be first initial or first name in combination with last name and any one of the 3 following data elements, which would be a social security number, a driver's license number, or a credit card, debit card, or financial account card number. Some of the other states expand upon that to include medical information, health insurance information, usernames and passwords, email addresses and passwords, biometric data, and tax identification numbers. So that standard definition encompasses many of the states, but certain states are adding additional elements, and that's one change that we're seeing across the board for many of the states in years to come.
Thank you, Alex. So the simple answer is there's a lot of commonality. California was the first state that had the data breach notification statute. California is very much the leader in the data breach notification obligations. California also has amended their data breach notification statute with great frequency, often by ballot plebiscite. And it's a ratchet that turns one way. The definition of PII expands, and the obligations and potential fines expand. It never goes the other way. So the answer, Alex gave you a very good and precise answer. The answer is there's a lot of commonality, but it's expanding, and it's expanding to include more PII. For instance, some states now include medical records as PII, and what school doesn't have medical records, right? Everyone does, to some degree. Most states, Pennsylvania, does not include medical records, right, Alex? So medical records are not PII in Pennsylvania, but more and more states are including them as PII. And one quick follow-up, I think most of the folks in this room probably have Pennsylvanians for students and Pennsylvanians for faculty, but the law which drives your notice obligation is the law where the individual resides, rather than where we call it the locus, or the location of the incident. So if you have folks in Delaware or New Jersey, either on your faculty or among your student body, it would be the law of those states which drive the notice obligation. Sir, did you have a question?
I was actually going to ask about the data was posted.
Okay, and that's a good question. It's not where the data is posted. The driving legal principle is where does the affected individual reside? And so small compromises in our world, small numbers of people sometimes rapidly become 15, 48-state notification obligations. For instance, if you have a boarding school and you have international students, then it's the data breach notification statute of Kuwait or Dubai or India, or soon GDPR and the EU, which will be applicable rather than the law of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Yes, sir.
Is it only when they were a student, or if they move, say they're in Pennsylvania now, they move to New Jersey?
Today, when it happens. Good question. Yes, sir.
Did I hear that email addresses were on the list of potential things that are being considered?
Yeah, Alex, you want to help me with this?
Sure.
So the trend, as I said a minute ago, is to expand the definition of PII. So a few years ago, it would have been inconceivable that email address and password was PII trigger list. There's a heck of a lot of it out there, it's easy to access. California made it PII, and sure enough, several other states added to it. You want to add to that, Alex?
Sure. So the key to it is that it's the combination of email address and password, because the states are concerned about unauthorized access to online accounts.
In other words, they're fearful that Jay Prendergast at Mullen.law, my email address, to get my password, they're fearful I can then use it at my bank or somewhere else.
But it's both together. I mean, everybody will have directories on their website, people's email address.
It's both.
It has to be both.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes. Yes, sir.
So what if the data is hosted up in the cloud, say by some service, because a lot of, let's say, we use Blackbaud, and supposedly they have a web-based service that would be hosted up in the cloud. If our information is up there, are we liable, or is the organization
question. The question is if your data is in the cloud and a little closer to heaven in Pennsylvania, is it more secure or safe, or are the responsibilities different? And the answer, of course, is you're responsible. If you want to put a simple notion in your head, it's this. An individual comes to you, either student or faculty member, and provides you, your school, with data. If you decide to entrust it to the cloud, the individual had no or limited responsibility or role in the passage of that data to the cloud. So it is the entity to which the individual entrusts their data that is responsible. That's not always true all the time, but it's the best principle to understand, and it will usually get you to the right legal answer. So student or faculty member provides you name and SSN so you can provide direct deposit of their payroll, or so that you can do all that is necessary for students, and you put that data in the cloud and it's hacked from the cloud, the notice obligation resides with the school that collected the data from the individual and then passed it to the cloud. Yes, sir. Yes, a very thoughtful question, and yes. So let's hypothesize a fact or two. Compromise in the cloud. Okay, cloud provider finds out that it has been compromised and your data has been compromised. Under most, I'll speak generally here, and Alex, you could jump in with particulars, please. Generally, the legal obligation of the cloud is to notify the data owner, you, the school. The notice obligation to the school is to notify the individuals affected, the teachers, the students, and often, but not always, a state regulator. 48 states in the Union have data notification statutes. About half of them also require you to notify a state regulator. It is usually the Attorney General's Office, Division of Consumer Affairs, some of whom are sleepy, some of whom are exceptionally aggressive in enforcement of data breach notification statutes. So if the compromise is in the cloud, their legal duty is to tell you, and your legal duty is to tell the individual. Now, contractually, you might force them to shift that burden. So now, if you have that sort of contractual power, some do, some don't. If you're Amazon or Walmart or whatever, the University of Michigan, maybe you can dictate terms to the cloud provider, and maybe you can't. Alex, do you want to add to that or no?
No, I agree with that.
Okay, good question. Yes, sir.
So jumping back to the paper records, a lot of us use off-site document retention companies. Have they been breached, and what do we need to think about in those situations?
Okay, the question is, you have paper records, and they're off in Iron Mountain or somewhere, okay, and there's a compromise there, okay? That was a guess. I don't know where anybody goes into that. Basement, mother house, Iron Mountain, whatever. Let me say, first of all, I've actually never had compromise involving paper records, securely stored off-site. Alex, are you aware of any?
I have had one where it wasn't stolen, but the document was misplaced.
Okay. So generally speaking, paper records stored off-site are pretty secure, and the simple reason is skilled hackers will find it a heck of a lot easier to hack into your network or the cloud than to access paper records at Iron Mountain. And they can do it clickety-clickety-click rather than accessing them from storage. So I think they're safe there. But to play it out, if your records, sir, were compromised in paper form while off-site, the legal duty and obligation of the off-site storage facility would be to tell you, and the duty would rest upon you to tell the individual if your population resided in a state where the compromise of paper records triggered a notice obligation. Again, if your students or protected folks in Pennsylvania, there's no notice obligation, even if name and SSN are compromised in paper form.
Could I just add?
Yes, sir, please.
So we have been involved in some of those events for large data storage warehouse entities. And it's exactly as Jim said, there have been events where those types of unfortunate data breach of a file of cases of files have either been misplaced, fallen off a truck, are not identified, where those types of events have moved forward and they have provided notice to the individuals that have actually been affected by that. So those types of events have occurred, and we've been involved in some of those as well. So,
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Yay, I finally remember which button to push. So Alex, I want you to help me here. So I'm going to focus on one of those things up there. These are threats. We see all sorts of kinds of threats. By far, the threat that we see most frequently now that causes our clients the greatest amount of agita and the greatest amount of notice obligation, cost, aggravation, et cetera, come from phishing attacks, okay? And right now in our office, we have, I don't know how many, 4 partners and 21 associates. We have numerous education clients that have been phished, and it sort of plays out this way. A phishing attack is teacher Jim Prendergast gets an email from Johnny at HR. Dear Jimmy, we're changing payroll platform. Please click on this link and provide your data immediately if you want to be paid tomorrow. I know you have 3 kids. So Jimmy immediately goes to the link, clicks on the link, and puts in his credentials. And the credentials are out in a flash. And the truth of the matter is, I try to be a little funny, we get this sort of things all the time, and they're always a rhapsody upon that same theme. Act urgently to provide your credentials if you want health care or you want to get paid. And people will stop what they're doing and provide their credentials. Once that has occurred, the content of his or her email account has been compromised, and all that is contained in that account may be compromised. So even if you have a 90-day purge policy, if Jimmy doesn't abide by that, and he happens to have an Excel spreadsheet in there that has all of the faculty name and social security number for payroll, because he's involved in this committee or that committee, one attachment to one email now exposed name and social security number for everyone in the school. And the worst part about it is it propagates like a common cold. So the intruder will go to the contact list, find out everybody, and send emails to everybody else at the school. And now you've got scores of people with this email. Everybody wants to be paid tomorrow. Everybody's uploading their credentials into a phishing attack, and you have a big problem on your hands. Alex, do you want to add anything to the phishing comment?
I would just like to emphasize a point that you made earlier is that most of the time they're spoofed emails, so they're made to look like they're coming from someone that you know and trust. And like Jim said, people are very quick to provide their credentials. And we see incidents where it starts with one individual, and as we're investigating, we learn that 15 other employees also clicked on the link and provided their credentials. So they expand pretty quickly.
And these just become disastrous. So one of the first things we ask our client is, how much data is in this email account? I don't know. Well, do you empty it every semester, every year? No. So how long has Jimmy been on faculty? 14 years. Might Jimmy have 14 years of emails? Maybe, because he likes to look in there because he keeps track of things. And so the compromise of one email account can be an absolute treasure trove of PII and trigger an enormous obligation. And so we see a lot of those, and schools are frequent targets. In the corporate world, there's usually a stiffer penalty for these sorts of things. And in the education world, there's more of a cooperative, open environment or way of thinking. And so that's my personal theory on it. For whatever reason, education clients are fished relentlessly, and they're fished more successfully than most of our corporate clients. That's not universally true, but we have an enormous number of education clients that have been fished. And when those emails go out laterally across your environment, that's when things get just awful. Yes, sir. No, from the CEO. From the CEO. Yeah, and there's just more of a regimen, and most education clients don't want to foster that environment for good reason. And so, and that's one of the evil geniuses of these folks, is they're conscious of vulnerabilities. Okay? Did you want to add anything to that screen, Alex? No? Okay. Okay, we just talked about this, and it's not terribly important that you get the names right, it's the concept. Oftentimes, these phishing attacks start with spoofing, which means it's actually not HR. It's not, Jones at HR. It's somebody pretending to be HR, and if you actually see the full URL, you know that. But people don't look for that, and they're not necessarily trained for that. And the genius of this thing is they will put pressure on you. So these emails, these spoofed emails, tend to arrive on Friday, late in the afternoon, and they really tend to arrive Monday is a holiday. And so there's a lot, there's an evil genius to the way in which these spoofing emails arrive. Some of them are clumsy, and it is apparent that the person writing the spoofed email does not have an eloquence with the language, so it's clearly their second language, but that's not always true. Often true, but not always true. So one of the things you can do is teach your educate about what a spoofed email will look like. And there's an awkwardness and an appearance that can be brutally plain about it. It often has an Eastern European sort of sound to it when you read it, these spoofed emails. And that is, and that's not the way the headmistress writes to you, then that's a big signal that it's not from her. Okay? So phishing emails and spoofed emails are an enormous problem. And think about it. You can have the smartest IT folks imaginable, but they're targeting your faculty and staff, and they're targeting them at a weak point. They want to get paid to provide for their family. They want to make sure the health insurance doesn't lapse, and so you get these emails. We changed healthcare providers, or Blue Cross insists, blah, 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 blah. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question about the phishing emails. We've seen a few different types. Some have the links, and some are just kind of please reply. The actual danger that can occur, would you need to click on some type of a link that would give access? Or is a reply often something?
That's an excellent question, and the question essentially goes to, what is it about these attacks that causes damage? Is it the link, or what is it? If I could reduce it to one concept, it's the provision of your credentials, okay, and how they trick you into providing your credentials. Often you're directed to a link. Often you're directed to a page that says IBC Blue Cross on it, but it's not IBC. And again, if you're careful and you look at it, you can figure it out. But most people don't look carefully. They're worried about, oh my God, they need to got an hernia operation on Monday, and they're saying, I'm not going to help you. So it's the provision of credentials. So it's often a link, but it sometimes directs you to a page that looks as though it's your medical provider. Did you want to add to that, Alex?
Sure. I'll just touch on the reply email. With the spoofed email, it'll look like it's coming from an individual that you know, but when you click reply, it'll actually send to an external email address. So if an individual were to reply to an external email address with their credentials, it would have the same effect.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, so that's a great question. And the question essentially says, and we see a lot of this, somebody will get an email, and it's usually directed to the headmaster's assistant. Dear Jimmy, headmaster meets with board tonight, an emergency meeting, needs everybody's W-2 tonight, wants to make sure we're not overpaying anybody. Okay, doesn't have to last, that's not that thing. But that's the way it comes. And again, it's rushed, it's at the end of the day, and it's to a smart person who's trained to please the boss. And that describes a lot of really good employees. They actually don't target dumb employees, they target smart employees who are trained to please the boss. And that usually asks for PII kryptonite, like everybody's W-2. We get a ton of these cases, usually around tax time. And the bad news is W-2s are leaked to an intruder, usually they file false tax returns within 24 hours, okay? We get a ton of those kinds of cases. So there's lots of ways that you can defend against it, but, and you suggested a way whereby you could color code responses that actually come from the headmaster, headmistress, director of HR, whatever. Any sort of way, any sort of process that you can employ is a good idea. But I always go back to training is number one. So you have the headmaster tell everybody, I will never ask you for W-2s, okay, on a Friday afternoon. I will never ask you over email for W-2s. I'll make up another one that we've seen. It's something they use in the intelligence community. You never transfer W-2s unless two people approve it. One of them's in the building, or one of them's named Mary or Jimmy. Build in a buffer such that a rapid reply does not happen. Build in a protocol such that at least one other person who's in the building will look you in the eye and say, that's from the headmaster, he needs the W-2. This actually is an emergency board meeting. Yes, sir.
Couldn't you also just have a policy not
You can do that, and if you can talk a headmaster into it, that's the best answer, okay? The truth of the matter is, most people at the top of the pyramid like to have a little flexibility, and if you can do that, that's a great answer. Alex or Joe, did you want to add to that? That's a huge problem, and we also see the same thing with vendors, okay? They'll send an email to your vendor, say, hey, this is Jim over at the Haverford School. We changed banks. That $75,000 that's owed, send it to this bank. And sometimes they'll say, put it into a green dot card. You'd be shocked the frequency with which those things are successful. And one of the reasons why they're so successful is, think about it, they can mass mail those things for a cost of a penny. Okay? And all they need is one person to reply out of 10,000 and maybe $75,000. It's not like in the old days where if you wanted to rob a bank, you had to walk into a bank. Now you clickety-clickety-click and you send out 1,000 emails, and if one person replies and redirects funds, it's a profitable endeavor. Okay? Yes, sir.
Does the state have a requirement to notify or to add to your email when you're transmitting PII to another member in a legal way? Is there, in previous employment, I had a requirement to notify the person that I was communicating with that my email or my attachment contained PII, whether it was encrypted or unencrypted.
That's a good question. The answer is no. There is no statutory requirement to do that. However, you're free to contract with people however you want to contract with them. So if you want to put that protocol, that control in by way of contract, that's a great idea. Okay? Okay. I'm sorry. This is number 2 on the bad board. Ransom. We see a ton of it. Okay? We see a ton of it. Alex, you do a ton of this. Do you want to talk a little bit about ransomware?
Sure. So going back to the previous slide, one of the main ways that ransomware is perpetuated is through phishing and spoofed emails, either with a link that contains a malicious file, or oftentimes we see emails with malicious PDFs. It'll say you need to access a document, and you click the PDF, and that has malware built into it. What ransomware serves to do is it locks the files on your system and demands payment in order to regain access to the files. Most of the time, the payment is required in Bitcoin because that's not tied to any bank and it's not subject to governmental regulations. Oftentimes, the FBI will recommend not paying it, but we recognize that for a lot of our clients, if the entity does not have backups of the data that was encrypted, or if the ransomware serves to actually encrypt the backups themselves, that payment of the ransom is the only way to re-access those files.
Ransomware is pernicious, and it's very common, okay? If you have backup to your data, you can back it up, and you don't have to pay the ransom. Sometimes the bad guys encrypt your backup. Sometimes they delete your backup, in which case your hands are up, and they got you. So what we usually do is retain the FBI my entire professional career. The FBI officially says, don't pay the ransom. And everybody pays it, and it's okay with the FBI. They just can't officially say to pay fees. But if your data is locked up, and your payroll data is locked up, or your student records are locked up, and the alternative, pay in Bitcoin to another price of Bitcoin soared, it's usually a smart idea to pay through ransom. They give you a key back. Sometimes that key is loaded with malware. So our experts sandbox the encryption key, make sure we have a clean key, we get deploy the key, unlock the encrypted data, and you get your data back. But it's very common. Yes, sir.
I would, you can't guarantee that the payment
Jim, I can jump in there.
Go ahead, Alex, please.
With all of our forensic investigators and also with the ransomware matters that our firm has handled, we've been highly, highly successful in receiving the decryption key in response to the payment. Again, it's not guaranteed, but in the incidents that we've handled, and we've handled many, many ransomware incidents, we've been very successful.
Can I just follow up on that, because you make a great point, and if you go online, you're gonna read exactly what you just said. And what this gentleman just said is, you can't be guaranteed a clean key. That's true, okay? All I can tell you is our law firm has probably handled 300 ransomware cases in the past 18 months, and I've had a few bad keys, and then my experts say, Jim, it's a junk key. We don't pay the ransom when we get a good key back, okay? And if you think about the logic of ransomware, it's sort of like street attacks of objects, okay? If you don't get good keys and the word gets out, no one's going to pay the ransom. The scheme works because for a relatively small amount of money, you get your data back, okay? But you're right, sir, I certainly can't guarantee it, but if you hire the right expert, at least I can tell you you have a clean key. You might not get a key. I can't promise you'll get a key. I certainly appreciate the comment. All I can tell you is we do this all the time, and I don't remember not getting a key. You, Alex?
No.
We get keys. But obviously, I can't promise it. And obviously, we're not dealing with good guys here. We're dealing with thieves. I'll get you next man. Yes, sir.
What do you do after you get your data back? What's to prevent it from happening again the same way next week?
Okay. You want to answer, Alex, or no? I'll take first swing at it. How do you prevent it from happening again? Good cyber hygiene, okay? Multi-factor authentication is the best way to defeat phishing attacks because you need a second factor in order to access the credentials, okay? But again, I'm a former DA, so I'll give you an experience here. Thieves will come back to the same building you burglarized. They'll come back to the same neighborhood to steal cars. Thieves are thieves, and they will fish in the same pond. So if you've been the victim of a ransomware attack, you're likely to be a victim again, okay? Because they know they got in last time, and they're probably pretty confident they can come back, okay? But there's no simple cure to it. The best cure is to educate people about phishing attacks. The best cure is to tell people that they shouldn't click on malicious links. The best cure is to tell people that the headmaster will never send you these sorts of emails. Alex, did you want to add to that?
Sure. No, I would agree with that. Multi-factor authentication is
If I
really
can just
helpful.
automatically trigger, universal, password changes, organization, things like that.
Go ahead, Alex.
Sure. So I mean, it'll depend on the number of accounts that were affected. We do typically recommend resetting passwords across the board if there's any chance that multiple people would have received the same email, even if we don't have evidence of compromise at that time.
So password resets are a really good idea, okay? The problem sometimes is when you do password resets, the bad guys getting the reset information as well because they compromise the account, okay? So it's a great idea, and we suggest it regularly. It is, however, by no means, yes, ma'am.
Have our data, data backup, they haven't taken that data, got everything they need, they're giving us our data back, yeah, they already have it.
Okay, so,
That's the first question.
hold a second, okay, let me answer the first, because I'm not smart enough to remember two questions. The question about ransomware is they have your data. If it's just ransomware, they don't have your data. If it's just ransomware, they got into your system and locked it up. You take it, okay? Ransomware is the insertion of encryption into your databases or network that locks up your data, and you pay these thieves for the key, and the key unlocks the data. We have definitely seen examples where these thieves will come in, take your data, mail it back to you, and say, aha, look what we have. That's a different and more pernicious problem, and it's far more likely to result in a notice obligation, because now we have unauthorized actors who actually have acquired your data rather than locked it up. We got you.
Yeah, see, who's gonna, you know, gonna answer the question. So who's, when the ransomware situation comes in and we're being advised to pay, is school paying for that? Is that gonna fall under the insurance thing, under cyber fraud? How are we laying that out?
It really depends on the scope of coverage that you got. Some policies will extend the ransomware. You know, this, and I think they're gonna probably talk about it a little bit. We're seeing this, this whole area expand, the types of exposure and coverages that are now being offered. That just a few years ago had never been anticipated.
Yeah, and just to expand upon that, the lawyers don't want to answer this question, do they?
That's why we said-
There is absolutely coverage under cyber insurance programs for things like ransomware, for phishing attacks. And in addition to that, there are absolutely insurance policies that will assist you in paying the Bitcoin, right? So that's all there for you to explore if, in fact, you did want to explore that. But yeah, the policy has actually been quite broadened in the last few years to cover these types of events because they do happen quite frequently and very often. But I have a question for the group here before we go any further. How many folks actually, business managers and folks here, how many folks actually know if their data is backed up? Right? And do you know if the data is backed up and you had an event, could you access, is it backed up by a third party? Who knows if they're, yeah, most folks, some folks, actually less than most of the folks that knew. You know it's backed up, you have no idea where it's backed up or who's backing it up for you. Is that really the, yeah. So when you get into these types of scenarios, it's really important to know, again, back to Jim's point, where that data is, who's holding it for you, who's doing something with it for you, what that contract says, because these types of events, you kind of need to know that information in order to mitigate them going forward. So it's very smart practice to understand where's the information backed up and who's actually backing it up for us in order to go forward. If you can't answer those questions, you're going to be dead in the water in about 3 seconds. Yeah.
So I'm a lawyer, not a highly technical person. Good backup is backup that occurs last night, not last week or 6 months ago. A lot of folks might say they have backup. We say, great, don't pay the fees. And when was it backed up? Well, the end of last semester. Okay. And then you have an individual. So a good backup occurred last night. A good backup occurred in a way that you can access it quickly. And good backup occurs in a way that the thieves don't see. I'll give you a disastrous example. I had a client, they backed up all their data, and they wrote a backup data file and put it in their database. Thieves found it illegal. Okay? So you need to be reasonably clever. The truth of the matter is, a little prevention will go a long way. So if your data is backed up off-site last night or last week, you're in a good place. Not a perfect place, but you're in a good place. Okay? But I would also test it. We've also had clients, and I keep thinking of education clients, because so much of this with ransomware and phishing, where they thought their data was backed up, and quite frankly, it wasn't, or it was done incompletely. So a little testing with your backup vendors is a really good idea. Yes, sir.
Just add to that, the way we deal with it strictly is we tier the data, not all data is equal. I mean, if a print server is deleted, it's of much less value than our database being deleted. So what we've come up with is an SLA saying, okay, if you're going to back up our database every 6 hours, because that's much more critical, it's way more work for 12 different people working on the database to recreate the data versus one to actually recreate print server. So for us, print servers could be once a week, whereas our database
which is essential to you, protect the data, which is going to trigger a notice obligation. I'm going to speed up a little bit. Our dear friend Joe has some slides as well. So I pointed this out a little bit earlier. The definition of PII is like an accordion that works one way, it expands. That was the PII yesterday. If it's changed, it's bigger today. It now includes username and password. It now includes medical information. Not Pennsylvania yet, but it's an accordion that moves or a wrench that turns one way. Okay? I want to talk about PCI for just a moment. PCI stands for payment card information. The four card brands, Visa and MasterCard primarily, Amex and Discover secondarily, wrote the rules of PCI, DSS, or the rules and regulations that govern the use of credit card. If your school accepts, transmits, or stores credit card data, in other words, if anybody can use a credit card to pay for anything at your school, you must be PCI compliant. Okay? The unauthorized acquisition of credit card data will trigger a notice obligation in all 48 states in the union. So credit card data is PII.
Even if it's an outside vendor that's stealing it?
Yes, sir. It's a great question, and it's rapidly on the same theme from earlier, and it's a great question. If your parent, your student, entrust you with the card data, even if that data is stored elsewhere and it's compromised elsewhere, you are the data owner under the general rule, the majority position under the statute. There are some where you can make a contrary argument, and there is a simple logic to it. The consumer has trusted you with the card data. If you trust vendor A, B, or C, that's on you. Yes, ma'am.
Which may be the paper concept.
Very well.
Oh, I should.
There's really no good reason in the world to have paper credit card data. All it is an invitation to having a compromise. Yes, sir.
So are we able to sidestep that? Like, let's say Airmark is our vendor when it comes to the students. If we have parents go directly to the Airmark website, deposit money in the student account, can we avoid that?
Small caveat, I'm not, I haven't seen your contract, so I'm not really definitive. Okay? The answer is yes. Because then you can store process. So if it never touches your system, you probably sidestep it. Now, I have to think about that and look at the facts very carefully in the contract, because there's still an argument that the consumer trusted you with the data. Okay? But I really need to see the contract, because that goes a long way to taking your system out of PCI scope. Yes, sir?
It's common for the schools to outsource part of this, and it's a common misunderstanding that they don't have the responsibility. It happens a lot at tuition collection emergencies, and we did a session in a similar way coming from that perspective recently, and that was an eye-opener.
Yes, sir.
The school has its brand on the page, where it goes to and things like that, but they're still getting away from their role, even if they've outsourced the function and depending on the security.
That's a very thoughtful comment, okay? The truth of the matter is most of our education clients don't think of themselves as having to be PCI compliant. And it's a very simple concept. If you store, process, or transmit card data, you must be PCI compliant. So theoretically, sir, you don't store, process, or transmit data. I'm not sure that needs to be a very careful analysis. But to the extent that you totally outsource it and your consumers recognize that they're not trusting their data to you, you're probably outside of scope for PCI. PCI is a world unto itself. You have obligations in the PCI world in addition to the statutory obligations, okay? And because the payment card industry gets to decide whether or not you can accept credit cards. So you must comply with PCI DSS reg as well as state data breach notification statutes.
Yeah, but Jim, that doesn't,
Go ahead.
correct me if I'm wrong, but that does not relieve you of any potential liability, right? That may arise out of the fact that you brought in a third party to help you process whatever data it is. And if that process is breached PCI data, any other data, you are still potentially liable, right, for any civil liabilities, any damages, suits, anything that might come in because of that, because of your reliance or lack thereof of due diligence that you did on that third party.
No question that's true. There's no question that's true, and thank you for bringing it up, because if I sent the message that there's no risk or liability there, that was certainly not my intention. Even if you can win a lawsuit after PCI breach, you've been sued and dragged to a lawsuit, okay? So if you accept credit card data, even if you totally remove it from the scope of your environment, that wouldn't preclude you from being sued. You certainly haven't reduced your risk or liability to zero, even under those facts. You simply reduced it. Okay? I'm going to go more quickly here. Joe has some slides. There are, like I said, 48 states that have statutes, and unfortunately, they're enforced by attorneys general who simply breathe additional language and life into them. For instance, Connecticut insists on 2 years of credit monitoring, even though the statute said 1 year. Connecticut insisted on 2 years when the statute didn't even mention credit monitoring. Pennsylvania Attorney General likes to have notice, even though there's no notice requirement in the Pennsylvania statute. Okay? So we just notice because we do it all day, and you don't want to run afoul of your state regulators. There are federal regulations. I'll skip these for the most part. My guess is that this audience has a fairly light federal regulatory footprint. Would you agree with that, Alex?
I would.
Yeah, because we deal with HIPAA all the time in the SEC and FERPA, which affects the great majority of our public school clients, probably escape most of those federal regulations. We talked about PCI, the credit card payment, you need to be PCI DSS compliant. If you have students from a certain state or employees, you must be compliant with the state obligations from the statutes. Joe, is this yours or mine? I don't even remember.
It's you.
Okay. You know what? I don't want to alarm anybody unnecessarily, but let me just say this. The greatest risk of litigation or some sort of formal censure will not come from plaintiff's class action attorneys. We have lots of our clients get sued, but plaintiff's class action attorneys, those are retail clients for the most part. Okay? Our education clients are most at risk of censure from regulators. And regulators do have the power to fine, and they certainly have the power to issue subpoenas and documents. Okay? So a significant minority of our clients are pursued fairly relentlessly post-compromise by attorneys general who demand proofs of good cyber hygiene now and good proofs of exactly why it happened in the first place. And that's not necessarily the place you want to be. You can be fined. I'm going to move past that. I don't want anybody up at night worried about those fines. Some of those fines are substantial. Our education clients are not usually targeted today. The regulators that usually are commercial clients, but you're in that world. Okay? Okay. Alex, did you want to touch on this quickly?
Sure. All right. So very quickly, what usually happens is when we get a report from an entity that they've experienced a compromise or a suspected breach, we typically engage vendors. The first step would be engaging Mullen Coughlin or another firm as breach coach. And we typically recommend engaging a forensic expert to get into the system, dig around, see what happened, what data might be at risk. If there's a need for it, some of our education clients fear negative media attention, so we do often engage public relations vendors as well. We then dig into the investigation to determine what happened. And once we collect that forensic evidence with the assistance of the investigator, Jim and I will do our legal analysis to determine if there are any notification obligations under state law, federal law, contracts. We then often engage a vendor to do the printing and mailing and notification. Often, if we think it's going to be a large event and there's going to be a large response that the entity can't handle internally, we'll engage a call center vendor to handle calls from affected individuals. And then again, Jim mentioned the Connecticut requirement to provide credit monitoring. Currently, only California and Connecticut have that requirement, but oftentimes, for good relations with employees or for public relations purposes, credit monitoring will be offered to all affected individuals. So we'll often engage a vendor for that purpose as well. Sure. So post-incident, we have a process in place. You want to ensure that you have a response team that's experienced in handling these types of incidents, or at least know who to contact. We encourage engaging outside counsel to establish attorney-client privilege. We then engage a forensic vendor on the entity's behalf in order to extend that privilege because we consider them our resource to provide information necessary to provide legal counsel to the entity. And we recommend not using the terms breach, PII, or PHI until it's confirmed legally because those terms do have legal connotation. Oftentimes with education clients who value transparency with their students and with their employees, there's a rush to notify individuals immediately. We don't encourage that because these investigations take time and we want to ensure that we're giving accurate information. You'll note that the target is a pretty high profile case and they came out many, many times expanding the population size, giving different information. So we don't encourage doing that, and we do recommend getting all the facts in line before we notify individuals. So document preservation is a huge issue. We notify our clients immediately upon experience an incident to retain all documents related to the incident in the event of regulatory investigation or litigation down the line. And in addition to post-incident response, there's a lot of things entities can do to prepare for incidents before they happen. A lot of it Jim discussed would be educating the individuals within your organization. Education is really key. You also want to assess and test the policies and procedures that you have in place and really evaluate the types of data that you store and how you store it to best protect against those types of incidents. Sure.
Jim mentioned earlier two-factor authentication. Can you speak just briefly how many schools have adopted that? We're looking at it as a pilot for high-value targets in our implementation.
Sure. So ultimately, it would be the best protection for everyone within an organization to have two-factor authentication on their accounts. Again, we recognize that that is often difficult, expensive, and difficult for the individuals to implement. So if you can implement that within the high-risk individuals within your organization, that is a really good first step. Jim, can you speak to how often we see that?
It all depends on funding. I would say infrequently, okay?
agree.
But I can't agree with Alex enough. It's the best prevention.
Right?
All
Joe,
right.
I think you're up.
Joe, you're up.
This is going to be a little like speed dating now. So we're gonna flip through some of these slides. Thanks for all the time you left me. So just to build off of what Jim and Alex have been saying, really we look at a number of things. It's people, all the people you're dealing with. It's how you mitigate the risk, and then it's the technology that you employ to actually prevent these types of things. Oh, again, back this way. So let's look at assessing the risk, understanding what your risk is. Jim talked about this earlier. What you do, how you classify your data, how you look at the data, who you employ to actually help you process data, move data around throughout your organization, looking at people protection solutions, et cetera. And then most importantly, actually what Jim and Alex just touched on is incident response. We're going to talk about that in a second as well. I'm not going to talk too much about this. This is a little bit about the threat environment. We know that these attacks happen all the time from insiders, negligent insiders. Those are people that you have employed, criminal hackers, hacktivists, and third parties that we touched upon earlier. Again, those people that you've entrusted your data, your information with. A little bit on, very quickly on claims and trends where we see. Take a look at the box to the right. Laptops, hard drive devices, hard drives, and other. It's really some lost, stolen devices. That's where we see a lot of this coming from. But hacks, privacy policy, look at human error here, 15%, pretty tremendous. Rogue employees, 14%. That's bad deed doers within your organization. I'm going to flip through this. The process really starts at the top, right? If you don't have a very, very robust cyber hygiene in place, cyber hygiene program in place, no matter what you do, whether it's you have the top IT folks within your organization, you've hired the very best firm to handle your data, whatever it is that you're doing in your organization has to start from the top, right? Top down. From executives, from yourselves here in the room, from many other folks that get involved. It's all about making sure that the organization, the entity, the school is aware of what's going on and driving that process down through the organization and educating along the way. I'm going to flip through the timeline. You guys will get all of these slides, I think, so I'm not going to spend much time on here. It just talks about when this all started. So let's talk a little bit about when insurance comes into play and how it really treats you. Number one, what you really need to understand is when we have an event, right? I'm not calling it a breach. I'm not calling it any legal term. When you have an event, it's very important to understand that you have access and you have resources available to you. So if you had an event right now, show of hands, who in the room would pick up the phone and call someone? Who would you call first? Attorney? You? These guys? Yeah. I'm going to tell you right now, almost every single client that we work with call these guys or someone like them, because the very first conversation you want to have is speak to a breach coach to really determine what the extent is, what's involved, who's involved, how it occurred, et cetera, to determine if you even have a breach first step. And then, and actually these folks and many folks like them that are contracted with the insurance companies will work through that process with you step by step. So you're not going to go into this with your general counsel, who is probably going to not understand what 48 states need to have done, or Pennsylvania, or any other state that you're dealing with. So they're going to direct you and they're going to advise you. But that breach coach is really there to move you through that process very efficiently and, frankly, very effectively. Not only the breach coach, but when I talk about insurance solutions and we talk about what these insurance products actually help you with, it is a very complete list, a very complete service provider vendor list for you for not only breach coaches, but how many folks are contracted with a PR firm? Anybody? Doubt it. How many folks have a vendor come in and look at the forensic investigation? Probably none of you, unless you're really already talking with someone or have had an event. What about a credit monitoring firm? What about a call service firm? If you're not already looking at these things, this is actually what is provided for you. And these folks actually walk you through the process. So I'm not going to touch on that. Let's talk a little bit about, there are some events here. These are smaller events, right? We're not talking about large-scale, major corporate events. These are small-scale school district events in schools that have actually had some events. This is a ransomware attack, demanded $19,000 in Bitcoin. Again, we can walk through it and talk through it. I'm not going to do that because of time, but this is a great example of a Bitcoin event. Small school district. This is a Washington County Schools in Minnesota. This is an event that affected 9,000 students. This was a mistake by an employee. Very simple. Information was inadvertently provided, affected 9,000 students. Here we have another school in Virginia. This actually has to do with the mailing of W-2s. Again, something we're all affected by, but another great example of how these things occur. So what does really cyber insurance or risk mitigation insurance cover? If you've not dealt with it before, all of the wonderful and glorious things Jim and Alex talked about with regards to the liability, the ransomware, the types of attacks, the third party holding your data, all of those events that were described earlier can actually be mitigated on the financial side through cyber insurance, through network and security liability types of insurance, media liability as well. That is if let's say your website gets hacked, or even if you've actually printed something, we could talk a little bit more about that, any collateral material, et cetera. The first party coverages really, I think, is where, for you folks, where the benefit of these types of programs come in. That is really looking at what is needed to mitigate the event, from the breach coach to the forensics to the call center, et cetera. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more right here. So when you look at, in detail, what these different coverage sections actually provide, crisis management, that's the immediate, what happens, when did it occur, et cetera. IT services, again, data restoration, notification costs, all of that is first party. Now, Do you need to have a liability lawsuit filed against you in order to trigger anything to do with these policies? The answer there is no, right? If you suspect something has occurred, if you find out something has occurred, if something has boiled up to you and you know that it has occurred, you can actually trigger these policies to, again, start benefiting from what these actual policies can provide you. And they become very, very beneficial to you. Yes?
Something you mentioned a great guy, why did you say those are first party? Why are stuff that's available actually third party?
Because the first party coverages, I want to make sure I understand your question.
So a lot, these events, we have, application things, a lot of what's available is out there in those insurance ways.
Yep.
So
Because as a school, as an organization, as an entity, we talked about if you've contracted with a third party, the liability for you may or may not come into play if you're sued, et cetera. But the first party costs, because you have an event and it's affected individuals, regardless of whether or not you have contracted with a third party, or you're being sued, or you have a regulatory authority knocking on your door, the first party crisis management event type of coverage you will need immediately. Outside of any type of lawsuit coming in and outside of anybody knocking on your door, if you've determined that an event has occurred, you can immediately tap into these types of coverages to help you mitigate the event moving forward. And that is exactly what you want to do.
Joe, can I add, the best way to avoid a third-party incident is to have a good first-party response. We do first and third-party. 85% of what we do at our firm is first-party. We can prevent third-party litigation with good first-party action.
Yeah. So one of the things we talk about is how many folks have gone through a crisis management workshop, incident response workshop? Only a few of you, right? So the time to think about how these coverages come into play or how the services come into play is long before these events occur. If you have no incident response plan in place, if you've not gone through a preparedness workshop, when this occurs, and it will happen to you, you will find yourself scratching your head, trying to figure out who do I call, when do I call, how do I call them, and trying to figure out what's the next step. Now, because most of your organizations are small, most of the schools are smaller, you may not have the FBI knocking on your door, or you might not have a regulator knocking on your door. What you might have is a group of irate parents, right? So how do you then look at those folks and determine what is our next step? How do we mitigate this? What is the process for us? And if you've not gotten each other in a room to talk about it before the event occurs, you will find yourselves in a world of hurt very, very quickly. Because even though you don't have the FBI or some other regulator, what you've got, potentially, is a state body looking at notification timeframes of you to potentially notify people. And those folks don't wait. It's immediate. So you need to determine and move forward quickly on all these things. That's why, in my opinion, first party is extremely important, and looking at how you actually have prepared for these events is, in fact, more important. I'm running out of time here. We talked a little bit about the insurance coverages. Again, the third-party coverages, this is network security liability. One of the other things that we talk about with our folks is business interruption. That is, in the event your systems are down or your outsourced third party is down, how do you operate? Do you operate? Is there a financial loss to you because you cannot access your systems? If there is, and that's something that's important to you, and you are looking at a way to mitigate the financial loss if, in fact, your systems are down, we can actually incorporate coverage for that business interruption loss. It's very similar on the property side to a property first-party business interruption loss, and we could talk about that. Just talks about some of the gaps in coverages here. Again, if you look at cyber privacy liability on the right and you look at all the other coverages, very, very few and very limited coverages actually respond to this type of an event. There is limited coverage under K&R, if you're not familiar with that is. That is a kidnap and ransom policy. Under a crime policy, potentially for some of what we were talking about earlier, which is the phishing events, general liability and property, very limited coverages again. And then we just talk about some of the intangibles. Looking at data analytics and how to figure this out, again, something that you should be talking about. What's the financial loss to you? This is something that we could talk about more if you'd like. And then this is just a little bit about the cyber insurance market, which again, we could talk more about at any point in time with you. And that's it. Any more questions? Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, what would the range be of the ransom awards or requests that you've seen?
How much dollar amount?
Yeah, yeah.
Anywhere from, I think I've seen something as small as $300 up to a couple million.
The news is bad and the trends are worse. We used to see half a Bitcoin and Bitcoin demands. They're always Bitcoin because it's anonymized. If it wasn't Bitcoin, we could put the FBI and go arrest them. Now we're seeing 4, 5, and 6 Bitcoin demands. What's Bitcoin trading for? $4,000?
Close to, yeah.
Okay, so now we're seeing demands in the $25,000, $30,000 range. So at some point that won't hold because people will stop paying it. But the ransom demands have literally gone from half a Bitcoin trading at $100 to 5, 6 Bitcoin trading at $4,000.
Yeah.
Are the demands kind of geared towards the nature of the enterprise? Like would a private independent school receive $1 million ransom, or is there some?
I would find it highly unlikely that you would receive a ransom for that amount, only because they would probably know that it would be unlikely that you would be able to do that. So again, as Jim said, these happen fairly efficiently and fairly frequently. Typically, these are not big dollar limits. Typically, they're going in for a quick hit. They want you to pay. They release the data or not, potentially, and they move on. This is an enterprise where they are making profits day in and day out. They want you to pay, and they move on. Yes?
Can you actually back up 2 slides just to talk about what the actual financial impact would be to the private schools to notify and what the cost is per record?
This slide?
Trends in terms of numbers of records that the schools may have?
Yeah. So really, when you look at numbers of records, really, this is a confusing slide, but what we talk about is how many records an organization might have across the top. And then the data breach expenses, we've looked at some modeling and extrapolated some numbers here. So if you look at across the top, the number of how much personally identifiable information that Jim was talking about earlier, how many records you have, we've modeled this for very large organizations, so it goes up to 100 million records. But you can see the costs here. So if you look at breach expense totals for 1,000 records, 10,000, again, this is our estimation based on our modeling with our own information. So we look at this information, we say, okay, with the expectation of 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, typically if you look at costs all in, that is the type of cost that you'd be looking at to mitigate that type of an event. And as obviously as the organization gets larger, and again, looking at how you classify the data, where you have the data, who's actually handling that data for you. If you have that much information, the costs obviously go up dramatically. If we look at civil liability, there hasn't been a lot of that to date, so it's much more difficult to model that type of event, but there's lots of data on the first-party costs, and that's really what we're trying to demonstrate up on the top. Does that answer?
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
And Bob, that's a great question, and now you're going to help me with the numbers, please. And this is a great, I think, answer to your question as well, sir, about where the costs come from and the first-party costs. So I'll give you a tiny illustration of a phishing attack. Somebody gets phished, and they have lots and lots of email. Okay, so we hire forensic vendors, and Alex does this all day, every day, and the forensic vendors use tools, proprietary, commercial, and otherwise, to identify PII embedded in the emails and in the attachments. Inevitably, they get to a point where their automated tools are unable to pull the PII, to separate the wheat from the chaff, okay? At which time, the analysis becomes manual. Alex, do you want to talk about that for just a few seconds? The difficulties involved and the cost involved, because the costs grow enormously once you have to do manual investigation into email compromises, and we probably have 15 cases right now in our office exactly on those facts, at least half of which are education clients. Alex, do you want to talk about that for a second?
Sure. So just to add upon what Jim has just mentioned, additionally, a lot of times our forensic investigator, through their proprietary tools, can determine exactly which emails may have been accessed during the window of compromise, while other times they're unable to do so, or they can determine that the entire mailbox was synced. So that expands that population of review that Jim was just discussing, and expands that manual review process. That manual review process is often very expensive, and depending on the number of mailboxes at risk and the number of emails within those mailboxes, we've seen range from $50,000 for manual review up to $450,000 for manual review. So that process is very time-consuming and expensive, and also delays that notification because we're unable to notify the affected individuals until we determine precisely what was contained within those affected mailboxes.
The last detail. An email account is compromised. The granularity of the logging is insufficient to the task, meaning our forensic vendors can't tell us which emails were actually opened or accessed by the intruders. You can give yourself the enormously generous benefit of the doubt and say, yeah, they probably didn't go there. Or you should do what we would recommend, the compliant thing to do, which is if you can't exclude unauthorized acquisition, then you should assume it. If you assume it, now you have the entire content of the email account compromised, and if you've got years of email in there and lots of PII, you're faced with a very difficult and very expensive proposition there. Does that make sense? Thank you. Yes, sir.
In a case like that, would you recommend limiting the amount of emails that are stored by an entity, like the damage that could be caused by such an attack, like, purging mail over a year old from your systems or something like that, or?
The answer for me is absolutely yes. We're big purgers, right? We always encourage our clients to keep only that which is necessary and to get rid of permanently and securely all that is unnecessary or unused. Most of our clients, however, balk at that a little bit because they're not sure what they need or not. Jimmy uses it, but Susie doesn't. And of course, lots of our clients don't want their students to have to change passwords frequently or purge their accounts because they just have and this again is the contrast between our corporate clients and our education clients. Our corporate clients are usually ruthless about saying, we will drain your email account after 60 days. And if you hurt the firm, then you're in trouble. Our education clients don't like to treat their communities that way, understandably. But if you want good compliance advice, purge. Keep only that which you need and empty everything that doesn't need to be stored account.
And Jim, to add to that briefly, purging doesn't necessarily require you to delete it entirely from your system. Oftentimes, our clients will move it to an online archive so that it's stored separately, but that it can be accessed if necessary.
A couple of weeks ago, right, the New York Times had an article about just getting into the school system and understanding all the student enrollment, where the students live, and I think the threat was, give us X, or we're going to go after your kid. We know where they live, and we know where your employees are. Do you remember seeing? Did you see anything about that? Do you remember where that thing ended up going?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with those cases. We're certainly familiar with the concept, and for the most part, the malevolent actors with whom we deal are thieves. For the most part, okay. Some are more pernicious and engage in blackmail or extortion, and there's money in it, which is why Joe talked about the coverages that you have. We think that is probably going to grow, and certain of our education clients are particularly sensitive to certain, I'll be specific. If the senator's child goes to your school, or the governor's child, or the city councilman's child goes to your school, they're a target, whether you want to think of them that way or not. Tom, Dick, and Harry, who work at our law firm, probably aren't, but there's no question in the world in which we live, everybody's relatively familiar with Anonymous. Generally speaking, the Anonymous group and their related group aren't thieves, rather they are hacktivists. So if they don't like mom or dad's politics targeting junior or the young lady in your school is not an uncommon phenomena. And usually that correlates to a ransom demand, or no demand at all, rather embarrassment to you, your brand, your school.
The only thing I would add, and I know we're running out of time here, is that if you do have, so that's a great example. If there is an event like that, you absolutely need to make sure, getting out of the cyber world and looking at what a general liability policy would say, or even a property policy, whether it's a property damage event. Because you can have an event manifest itself, a bodily injury type of event, manifest itself out of a cyber attack. We've already seen that with some very large cases. But who's to say that these types of events won't continue to manifest themselves? And frankly, I actually think they will, right? So we know that under medical devices, cyber attacks, they cause bodily injury, right? They have and they will continue to do that. So on this type of a question as well, definitively looking at your general liability policy, looking at your property policies to see how each one of these different types of coverages and solutions dovetails with an event, very important. So take a look at those policies, take a look at those provisions, take a look at those clauses, because you don't want to be left holding a potentially very costly event because you failed to look at the type of event and the occurrence downstream that it could potentially have effect on other policies that you have in place. So I think that's it.
Gentlemen? Oh, one more. Is emailing somebody's social security number by HR or whoever who has access to it to another entity in itself a violation of PCI?
That's a great question, but PCI is credit card. So PCI, that's a, okay, yes. Sending, well, hang on. Sending an email with a social security number is not illegal or contrary to law. The unauthorized acquisition of same is. So it is certainly good cyber hygiene and good policy to never send in plain text a social security number, okay? Truncate it, encrypt it, mask it somehow is always best policy. But it is the unauthorized acquisition of data that triggers notice under the state data breach notification statutes. But it is not per se illegal to transmit social security numbers. It is, however, poor practice. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yeah, so the question was, so it had been a credit card number I transmitted over email. Would that be a violation of PCI?
Yes, I'm sorry. PCI proscribes the plain text transmission of credit card data. So yes, you ought never to transmit credit card data unencrypted. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I think it's possible for institutions to get filter up their network, get searches for social security numbers, and potential credit card numbers, and then will hold up outgoing email for that reason, and refer it to the network as a little secret. I think it's important.
It's a great idea. There are lots of great ideas. That's a good one. We are always sensitive that it's easy for me to stand here with great ideas. One, they cost money. Two, sometimes when you put new software in, it breaks other things in the network. And so that's a great idea. You should do it. It's something that should be universal. But I'm always mindful that nothing is as simple in this world, which is why you want to have smart IT folks in charge of these things. Sometimes post-compromise, our folks will come in and deploy agents across your environment. Carbon Black is a common tool we use. It's a tool placed throughout your network which identifies incoming IPs, identifies outgoing IPs, quarantine and containing malware. Okay, every now and again, our forensic vendors will deploy agents that break your environment. Okay, so it's a little bit like medicine. People respond to anesthesia differently or certain medicine differently. Certain of the agents deployed by our forensic vendors that can break things. So we're always conscious of the fact that it's easy, that there's lots of cures out there, but you got to be careful how you deploy them, and you got to make sure they play nice with all the other software in your environment.
The biggest thing to keep in mind is, frankly, everything that we're talking about here, it kind of really goes back to people, right? You can employ the most sophisticated technology there is. That's not going to stop someone from clicking on a link. It's not going to stop someone from forwarding an email. That's not going to stop someone from taking information in a wrongful way or doing something in a negligent way. So really it's about making sure you've got, yes, the greatest hygiene programs in place, but it's also about training the people. Because if your people are not trained and they don't understand what those crown jewels to even your entities are and how to protect them, you will fail, and the organization will find itself in an event like this very soon. So really understanding and training the people of of why the importance on the data, why we should protect it, how we should protect it. Because time and time again, if you look at almost every single event that has occurred, even if it's a missed patch, which is a people issue because people didn't apply patches, they all go back to people issues, all of them. So we can really take a look at that. And again, training is really important.
Yes, sir.
So the things that we really need to protect are credit card numbers, social security numbers, and student names. Is that essentially the key? I realize it's probably more trivial.
It's a fair question, okay? So, and Alex, you're going to help me here, because Alex has a much better brain than I do. So I would say kryptonite is name and SSN. I would say kryptonite is name and financial data. I would say kryptonite is name and credit card number. I would say kryptonite is name and driver's license number, okay? So anything that could easily lead to the theft of your consumers, your parents' money, their ACH data, your staff's money, their direct deposit information, that's high on the list. And social security number is the currency with which thieves trade. So if you go on the dark web tonight, you can buy social security numbers. They're there ready to purchase. You can buy them in dumps. Dumps are big numbers, or you can buy them in smaller numbers. And social security numbers always have value on the dark web. Stolen credit card numbers have a very short shelf life because they expire, cards are reissued, et cetera. But name plus credit card number, name plus SSN. Alex, do you want to add to that list?
No, I would agree that those are the main sources.
But they're not the only ones. Don't quote me. Not the only ones. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Well, I guess first answer is I'm not a banking attorney, so I don't know whether there are independent banking regulations or some sort of federal regulatory. Okay. See, I don't know that. For how long do they have to be kept? Okay. Then I suggest you put them under lock and key for now. Yeah. Put them in a file cabinet. Run a steel column down one side. Put an old-fashioned padlock on it, and only you know the combination. It's old-fashioned, 20th century security, but it works. Okay, and I think that's as good as you can expect. Or you can pay somebody to digitize them and put them in the cloud and secure cloud. Say again. Again, I'm not precisely sure if it's a federal regulation which applies or a contractual obligation which you may have. You're talking about paper, right? Okay. Whenever you're talking about paper records that have unique identifiers, anything includes social security, any unique identifier, like a passport number, is akin to a social security number. If you have them in paper form, I would suggest that you find out the precise legal obligations associated with some federal regulation. Not my expertise. I looked that up. I have to know it, and I keep them under lock and key in a relatively secure place, and make sure it's somebody's obligation to check the lock every month. And the minute, and you rotate them so that when it hits the bottom drawer, it's 4 years and it's out. Just have a protocol like that. Okay with you, Alex?
Yes.
Anybody else? You, sir? Thank you kindly for your courtesy and your time. We are happy to be here. Thank you.
Before we begin the second phase of our day here, why don't we take a 10-minute break, and we'll reconvene at 11, and what we will do is review the business insurance part of the day. So, and please come back because we have a tiny check for you at the very, very end, so reason to stick around. Yes, Ransom. Well, I don't know how much people have to explain to their finance committee or board. So, do they really need all this, or are we reinforcing the effectiveness of the program, or is it just like, all right, let's give us our check and go? You know what I mean? Like, I think some people there's just an implicit trust, which is good, and some there might be some curiosity, you know, about how it works, but. Yeah, overall, hard to tell.
Yeah, it's always tough to gauge.
But people are just, like in my role, just too much to do. Not enough time to do it.
No.
And so it becomes like, what's your sweet spot? What do you know? What things, you know, do you really need to pay attention to? And or what boils up. You know?
And that's why it's always, you know, critical that we sit down and have those pre-renewal discussions to say, you know, yeah, we gave a general overview at the meeting. You were either there or you were not there, but what are the concerns that you have specifically? And
Yeah.
can we address those for you now? That's
Yeah. Well, and
usually
when,
drives
if people are like conversational with you, then you take them back.
Yep.
You've got them, but if they just don't want to appear ignorant, then
Well, and that's,
it's easy for me.
and I think it's easier for people to say, you know, oh, I don't have a question, then after you leave the meeting, be like, oh, one thing that came up, and send you an email.
Yeah.
Because then you're not,
Right.
you're not looking at me in the face going, are you really that dumb?
You guys
Hey,
don't do
Carol,
that.
How are you?
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
We were just talking about that.
There's 30 some.
I think there were 30. I'm not sure how many are
But
only
not
two
all of them are
non-members.
actual members. Some of those are members of PAISBOA that aren't in the group, and some of them are duplicate people from the same institution. So, yeah, we're probably pretty light in terms of total membership showing up.
That's what I was trying to remember last year. I think it was more in the 40s, but and there's a requirement to come. So yeah. Well, but we mail their checks, and we should put them back into the pot if you don't show up and redistribute them as a penalty.
Hit them
but,
where it hurts, right?
Well, you know, I think it's the same.
Yeah.
It's, it's the same thing with the board. You know, it's when we're for PAISBOA trying to figure out how to get people to engage, and it's just harder and harder. No. Oh.
I have. Yeah.
Oh, good. I've heard of him. Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I thought Don was going to pave the way a little bit, you know.
Well,
so.
he and Reed have had several conversations, so I'm a little concerned that he's asking that question at this point. But you know, selective memory sometimes.
He's from New England, right?
So he should be familiar with the idea of the group, and the Nutmeg Association is operating up there. So, yep.
Okay.
Probably call him really good.
Hello, folks. Can we have a seat so we can begin? Okay, well, thank you all for being here, and hopefully when we go back to our offices, we don't have any ransomware notes. So, but anyway, before we begin, I think there's a few thank yous that are in order. So we saw this great presentation from the folks from Willis, and so I know many of you know Jamie Murphy and Bob Polini. Reed is always available. Hall Vetterling, and there's a whole bunch. So can all the people from Willis please stand up so we can give them a nice round of applause? Thank you so much for all your great service. Yeah, thank you guys. I don't know about you, but whenever I have a question, they're very responsive. They're always very knowledgeable. And as you can see from today's presentation, there's a proactive nature to all the risks that we face. And so we're very, very fortunate to have this relationship and such great bench strength. So thank you again, guys. Next, I'd like to thank Frank McNamee and Rick Hinckley. Could you please stand up? And we'll hear from these guys later, but these are our consultants from Capital Advisors. So they, as you will see, monitor industry trends and give us sort of some guidance as to where the insurance industry is and where we should be positioned. So how about a round of applause for these silent partners here? And last but not least, I'd really like to thank the board, the PAIS Big Board, and of course the PAISBOA. Thank you, Aggie, for all the support that you do. So some of our board members are here, and we'll hear from some of them. Colleen, Bradley, please stand up so we can acknowledge you. Also, we have Steve Feld in the back. Neil Finelli, I don't believe, is here. Chip Muir, could you please stand up so we can acknowledge you? Come on, guys, stand up, please. It's all their hard work. And then we also have Rob. He's, I don't believe, here today, but we're very, very fortunate. And then we also have some real strong support from non-voting members. So again, Aggie Malter and Bob Mueller, who may stick his head in later. But thank you guys for all your support and really making this work. So thanks. Nice round of applause, please. So as you can see, this is sort of our agenda for today, and we'll try and be brief and hopefully get everybody out by noon or a little bit earlier. So my name's Mark Murray. I'm the Director of Finance at the Montgomery School. And so what I'm going to do is just give a sort of a review of the program. So sometimes we kind of are part of a group and we have so many other things that sort of take our attention, we forget what really it's all about. So just going to be kind of a high-level overview. So what you'll see here is a timeline. And so our policy period runs February 1st, bless you, so February 1st. And then you see the bolded date, that's February, that's November 15th, that's today. So we're here at our annual meeting. And so what will transpire, and may have transpired already for some of us, is Willis comes out and does their annual renewal. So they'll come visit our schools, give us opportunities to understand any program changes, ask questions, and maybe have opportunity to find out some of our unique circumstances and how we deal with those. So that'll happen between now and I don't know when they finish up, maybe December, January, maybe even February. So you'll see those folks come out, and again, you have an opportunity to ask them detailed questions about your unique circumstances. So what happens in February, so this past February 23rd, what happens is our board gets together. We look at the actual experience that our group has captured in terms of claims, and so we begin to understand what does that mean for the dividend. So we move to May, and so May, what we have is our detailed claims review. So there's our work policy claims and then our package claims, and they are sort of voluminous and can be claims that are settled within 6 months. Some are open for years and years. So just to give you sort of a scope, our package open claims can range somewhere between $1 million to $2 million, and then our workers' comp claims can range anywhere from $1 million to maybe $3 million. So those are open claims that are in process, and you can guess that the workers' comp claims are more complicated because of medical conditions and things like that, and so they tend to be open for longer periods. But the part of the reason for reviewing the claims is to make sure that they're adjudicated sort of in a sense of fairness. So, you know, what we have to remember is that, yeah, we pay premiums and we look at that as an expense relative to all of our budgets, but we have this insurance to provide sort of a safe environment that supports our community. So if we have an adverse outcome, we know our employees are taken care of, we know our property can be replaced, and we have the ability to relax a little bit about some of the struggles that we have. So we move to September, and that's the time of period where we begin the discussions to understand what the next renewal period would look like. And so there's some dialogue, and again, we use our consultants to provide input to understand where we are, where we should be positioned as a group. And then, so what happens November 3rd, this past November 3rd, we get together, figure out our presentation, figure out you know, what we need to share with you as a group, so that we have hopefully an informative and productive meeting. So any questions about the process? So I just want to point out there's 5 board meetings. So if anyone is really interested in joining the group, it's really a manageable kind of commitment. And we have some newer members, and I think they've enjoyed the process. So if you have any interest, please feel free to see me afterwards. So just again, high-level review, the dividend program, we have two. We have our package policy, we have our workers' compensation policy. So you can see the coverages under the package and then under the workers' comp. So high level, just conceptually, what happens is we collect all of our premiums from our group, and then so what we do is we pay out claims, or Utica pays out claims. And so the dividend program is an attempt to sort of smooth our premiums and try and get us to reinforce our safety programs, our risk management programs. The goal is to, as a collective group, provide the safest environment that we can through education and minimize the risk, minimize the exposures, and certainly minimize the loss. So again, the way it works is we collect all our dividends, then we pay out claims, and then there's costs that the Utica incurs to manage our programs. And then what happens is there's a hurdle, and then anything available after that is available for a dividend. So that process works the same way for the package program and for the workers' comp program. So the non-dividend programs, everyone has D&O insurance and then primary umbrella, and then some of us have the optional coverages, as you can see there. And so we had a great presentation on cyber liability. This isn't a plug, but if you don't have that, you might want to seriously consider it given the nature of the world these days. So this is just a pie chart by percentage of how the lines of coverage break down. So you can see the package and workers' comp are nearly 75% of where our premium dollars go. And again, some of the other ones are optional. Some of us have student accident and travel and so forth. So they're somewhat unique to your specific circumstances. This same pie chart, this shows you the premiums in dollars. So those added up are $5.2 million. So one thought is to, the purpose of insurance is to create a pool to share a risk. And so if we think about our own individual premiums, for instance, my school, they approximate $100,000. And so you think of your $100,000 in a pool of $5.2 million. And so if we have, which we'll hear more about later, if we have a significant loss, would be a workers' comp or a property loss of like $1 million, and you marry that up to your $100,000 premium, if you're out there on your own, you're probably going to see a bump in what you're paying as far as your premiums. And by bump, I mean a significant change. And so if your school is unfortunate to have one of these significant losses, remember, because you're in this big collective pool with 5.2 plus million in premiums, the impact on your individual enterprise is mitigated because of the collective strength of our group. So one item to share, this I call it the super umbrella, and so we all generally have an umbrella policy, but some of our schools have significant assets, significant resources. We have boards that are risk averse, and so there's an ability for a very, very a low cost for schools to create a super umbrella, so well above kind of the typical umbrella. Most schools maybe go up to 10 million, some are less than that. But so you can go up in increments to 50 million, and because it's a pool, that risk again is shared over a bigger group, and the premiums are ridiculously low. So if you think about sharing risk and mitigating tremendous losses, this program is very, very cost effective. So I think currently we have like 20 participants in this program, but when the Willis comes out for renewal, if you don't have it, you might want to inquire the benefits of the program relative to sort of what your resources are for your school. Yes. That's a great question. The program is how old? I think it's three years.
Well, part of the reason is there are some schools that participate that do not have a $10 million attachment. Right? So they look at the minimum attachment is $10 million, so schools have to be a $10 million. Some schools have much higher limits and attach higher up. We've got some smaller schools that they only buy $5 million. We'll talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great question, and yeah, we'll hear more about the umbrella and the ability to get to that $10 million threshold is going to be improved quite quite dramatically. So at this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Colleen Bradley. And Colleen, thank you so much for sharing with us some good news, bad news, but you'll really get to really understand how this program all works and why we all should be in it and remain in it. So thank you.
Good morning. So who here again is not part of our group? Really just, okay. So we're going to convince you to come with us. I want to highlight some of what Mark basically already said regarding the benefits of the program. The program was established based on 4 Ps. One is partnership, which basically is built upon to make sure that not one member is left behind to shoulder the weight of the claims. And I can't speak to this enough as far as schools that unfortunately experience large claims, that if they were to have to cover that themselves could really have a huge impact, and being part of this group, you're really isolated against that. The second thing is the potential, the stability over time, leading overall cost, leading to low price and protection from market volatility. And the third item being a very comprehensive and unique kind of coverage for independent schools, knowing the types of risks that we're exposed to. I think our group really looks out for us within the aspects of the plan that is written. And the fourth item being very proactive as far as risk management. I can't say enough about the safe school training, what we do every year as far as all new employees and existing employees. This system, we can actually send out to all of our employees and have a due date as far as, say, child abuse training to harassment training, et cetera. And it provides a historical database that all you have to do is enter the employee's name in, send the link out. You know when the employee's completed the training, who hasn't completed the training, as well as being able to talk to Utica directly. I think Don Landry has been a huge resource for our school when many times various situations arise that you're not quite sure of how to proceed, and giving Don a call, he's extremely responsive. So the next slide is regarding the dividend. And basically, this is an incentive or a return for an incentive for schools to get a return on the premium that they've paid. So as an aggregate, if our claims are very low, then at the end of the year, we'll see a dividend. And if you're looking at the history, you'll see that we have experienced some nice dividends over time. In the event where the dividends are low, it's usually because the group has paid off some large insurance claims. So as we speak, there's a $1.3 million insurance claim that will definitely impact our dividend, as well as we have a contingency that we'll need to build up for the future. And but at the same time, the claim actually came in, I believe it was in year 12, 13. And if we would have known about the claim at the time, that dividend would not have been paid out. However, since it just surfaced and we just got news we will pay it out, it will impact this year's dividend. But in the meantime, overall, it's a really nice program for when you do manage risk. And unfortunately, there's things that a fire that you could not have prevented that starts, and it turns into a huge claim. Being part of this program really helped that school as far as manage costs, because it was part of the larger program. I think that's all I wanted to say. So Mark, oh, you're back.
Thank you, Colleen. Okay, I'm Rick Hinckley with Capital Advisors. Let's see, doesn't come any higher.
Okay, it's been a very interesting year so far in the insurance world. If you've read the papers or looked at the internet, you've seen a lot of catastrophe activity. As we see here, catastrophes have been extremely large this year. In fact, if we look back to 1980 or so, only 2 years exceeded $100 billion worldwide of insured losses. This year, Harvey, Irma, Maria, and the earthquakes in Mexico are at about $100 billion now. So without the others, we've got right here in our neighborhood over $100 billion in claims, plus some other claims. So 2017 is going to be an absolute record year for catastrophes. Swiss Re, the CFO of Swiss Re, was speaking last week, and he said, don't be surprised if you see some 50% rate increases in the reinsurance world, which bears a large part of the catastrophes. So that could cause a change that ripples throughout. And with that $100 billion of losses going back to 1980, those are adjusted to present day dollars. So it is really significant what happened this year. Okay. Fun stuff, catastrophes. Overall, investment results, which drive the profitability of the insurance industry, are flat with last year. Interest rates have not moved. The only thing that has been a positive, does not affect the income statement, has been the growth in the stock market, which continues to go up and up and up. One of the concerns that I have, and I think I'm not unique in it, is the stock market correction, which I've been hearing from every investment advisor is coming, and it'll be here, and so on and so forth, so we should do something about that. It will come at some point, and when you knock 10% off of the market, that's going to have a pretty big impact on insurance companies' results and surplus. So we'll see if that causes a pricing change when and if it happens. Let's see. The capital position of the insurance industry right now in the United States is at a record high. There's over $700 billion in surplus, and that is supporting just over $500 billion in premium. So that surplus is not being heavily utilized. Companies are looking for return, and they really are not getting it. They've been still cutting some prices, as you can see to the right there, but I don't think that's going to continue forever. We've seen it sort of start to turn upwards in terms of the price cutting going forward. Prior year development is another thing that affects insurance companies' results. The ability to take down reserves from prior years has been going down recently, and it looks like the reserve bucket might be empty in terms of any redundancies, and the ability of companies to increase their earnings by taking down prior year's reserves looks to be very limited for the future. Let's see. New capital, virtually no new capital came in the last year or so, last 2 years actually, to the insurance business. And finally, still have this softening market despite that. The graph to the right there is from the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers, and it shows it by account size. It goes from top to bottom there. The line that's closest to zero is the small accounts. The line that's furthest, that's most negative, are large accounts. We as a group would be a large account, but as individuals, only 1 or 2 schools would qualify under their definition of large accounts. So we're somewhere in between. Okay. All right, now, is this going to do it? Oh. Just a couple more slides. There we go. Nope, wrong way. Okay, we're looking now down at our own level, away from the industry, and looking at our results in terms of our rate levels over time, and we have been below the comparable industry in the package, although the gap between the red line and the blue line has been narrowing over the past few years, and that's reflective of rate cuts that have been effective there and our stability that we've had with pretty much zero increases and actually a decline a few years back. So, but it's getting closer and closer together. The green line reflects the impact of the dividend. So we actually have been paying a significantly lower amount than what would be our competitors, our comparables. Okay. Workers' comp, we've got basically the same story. We had an advantage over the years. The dividend has been big, but is now going away. It's become much smaller in terms of impact. We still, however, are lower than comparable schools. Actually, this is from the Pennsylvania Workers' Comp Board. Okay. Any questions? All right. Bob Polini is going to talk now about loss trends. So.
Thanks, Rick. So despite your best efforts for safety and risk management, believe it or not, we still see some claims within our individual group. And what we're seeing are specific claims to concussions. Right now, we have a couple of claims on the books for this individual group that are carrying significant dollars with them with regards to concussions. But what's important to note is that those concussion claims aren't necessarily all from sport-related injuries. They come from a multiple different areas of loss. So we're seeing injuries that happen on the playground that are resulting in head trauma that are concussions and carrying heavy dollar settlements. We're also seeing it in boarding schools. One of our largest claims wasn't a sports-related injury at all. It was two girls sitting on a bed laughing, and one fell off and hit her head. So as you can see, we all think concussions, we put it back to sports, but it's not necessarily all sports-related. So even if you're a school that doesn't have a robust sports program, you have a concern with regards to concussion injury. Abuse and molestation, what we're seeing is a rise in the frequency of those claims as well as the dollars associated with those claims. But what becomes more troubling is the long tail associated with an abuse type claim. What we're seeing are claims that are coming out from years and years past. We've seen allegations arising from the early 2000s that are now just coming to fruition and impacting our overall book from a loss standpoint. We're also seeing severe weather impacting our book. We had a lightning strike claim that resulted in a building burning to the ground and having a price tag of over $1.3 million. We're seeing heavy freeze patterns in the wintertime that are causing pipe bursts that are doing extensive water damage to the buildings that we insure within this program. Those are things that we can't control other than making sure that temperatures are controlled in those buildings over weekends. You're not reducing the temperatures to save money because in the long run it is going to end up costing us. When we look at our claims patterns, we don't just look at what we see currently on our books, we also look at developing trends. One of the biggest topics of discussion has been artificial turf fields and what that means from a loss standpoint. A number of our private schools have turf fields. But what has come out is there really is no link between the materials used in those turf fields and bodily injury associated with that, at least to date. The EPA has gone on record as saying there was no correlation, but there are claims coming out and people are, raising an eye towards those. And we're keeping an eye on that and seeing how that develops within the overall insurance industry. Another one is personal injury claims. Most schools either allow bring your own device or have school-issued devices, and all of those are generally smartphones and tablets that have the ability to take video, audio, and picture recording. The concern becomes, are you allowing those devices in your locker rooms? And the ability for people to instantly post video and picture. That becomes a great concern for us, and how are our schools dealing with that? We think that is going to be a potential impact to our loss experience as we move forward. Drones, also an area where we see developing trends for the possibility of loss. As more and more schools start to adopt drones for different facets of what they're doing, whether it be marketing, taking aerial photos of campus, homecoming, graduation, sporting events, or it be the facilities team using the drones to take aerial footage of the roofs to assess damage rather than putting somebody up there. There is the potential for bodily injury or property damage associated with the use of a drone. So the insurance companies have seen that. They have made some changes to the coverage position with regards to drones, and we're keeping an eye on that and seeing how that progresses. With that, I'll turn it back over to Mark, who will talk about the upcoming renewal.
So this is the part of the program where we talk about what to expect in the 18-19 renewal period. So come February 1st, that's when our policies kick in for the next year. So as you may recall, about when we had the pie charts up, 75% of our premiums are covered by the package and workers' compensation coverages. And after careful consideration, our board approved a no increase to the premiums for next year. And actually, I think it was Reed was capable of negotiating a 0% increase for the next 2 years. So what that kind of looks like is that we're not going to incur any additional increases in our premiums, but then we have the ability to maybe go back to Utica if market conditions improve. But I think you heard Rick tell us there's many factors that are causing upward price pressures in premiums. So I think if we really digest this, a flat renewal is great for 1 year for sure, 2 years maybe really for sure, and 3 years could be even better given the trends and conditions. So I think that's a win. And so some of the other policies again that some of us, all of us have would be a D&O. So just to scope it, it's a 5% increase. If we look at it in terms of total dollars for the group at large, it's roughly $15,000. And so again, think of 15,000 on 5.2 million. It's really minimal. And if we take our average account for D&O, it's about $8,000. Many schools, that's about what you would pay in premium. So a 5% increase is sort of de minimis. And then again, some of us have student accident insurance. A 2% increase is again the total for the group is less than $3,000, and the average account premium is $4,000, so it's peanuts. So as when we were talking about the super umbrella, all of us, many of us have just a general umbrella. And so what some more good news that's in the pipeline, and it's formulating as we speak, and Reed alluded to it earlier, is that Willis is in negotiations to improve the umbrella program. And so what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to buy more coverage. So if we're not up to 10 million and we want to get to 10 million so that we can then participate in the super umbrella, we'll be able to do that at a very cost-effective way. And so most of us, I think, will experience some savings in our general umbrella program. So it hasn't been crystallized yet, but I think when you have your renewal, you'll get a sense once that all gets finalized. So that's the good news relative to the umbrella program and the overall program. So again, the renewal. So you look at the workers' comp and the package, we'll be paying those same dollars again. And again, just to go back to the concept of the program, the idea is, we have to collectively manage our risks, and the better, more effective we are at doing that, those savings will then yield dividends. And so even the top dollars that you see as far as premiums that we're paying, historically what has to happen in your mind is you have to reduce those amounts by the dividends that we've gotten over a number of years. So, some years they've been 400,000, and it's been a long period of return of dividends. So, hopefully we'll have a successful 18-19 year, and we won't have any of these major kind of catastrophic claims that are some of the reasons that we're in this group. So I know you all came for your check. You could see the package performance this year with the $1.3 million fire. That kind of impacted our overall collective group. And again, imagine yourself being out there on your own, experiencing that result, and then dealing with the fallout from that with your next renewal period. So the bad news was no dividend under the package. The good news is there was a dividend under workers' comp. And so in order to capture that benefit, if you would see Jamie at the end of this program, you'll have a check to bring back for your coffers. So at this point, does anyone have any questions about the presentation? Any questions about the process? Yeah, Hal.
Mark, can you or any of the experts in the room comment on the tail that Bob mentioned, because I think that's an issue for
Thank you.
But by the same token, you're paying for claims from 2002 with the group's insurance of today. So if you were an individual school,
Well, the premiums collected in 2002 actually pay for the claims that happened in 2000. Now, the way this dividend plan is set up, we've got 4 years of a rolling average. So if it's outside that 4-year window, it doesn't affect the group. The carrier is still paying the claim. Right? So that 4-year, but if it's within that 4 year, and you know, it develops and increases in size, it may have an impact next year or 2 years within that group. If it's in that 4-year window. Way beyond 4 years, it doesn't impact us at all.
and if it was an individual school that had that happen, would it impact that individual school?
The short answer is no.
Okay.
Right? And I say that because the whole reason for this group is stability. We've had some very large losses that individuals have experienced. And year 2, 3, or 4 after that, there's been no negative impact.
Right. So the benefit is being a part of this group to absorb the impact of those major claims. If you're out there by yourself as an individual school, not a part of this group,
You may find yourself
that's not so good.
non-renewal.
Right, right. And that would be the best thing that happens to you, as a, you know, those things. There are worse things that will come as a result of paying non-renewal rates.
Great. Any other questions? Yes.
Any comments on the trends in international travel?
Well, I think we're all, we're all aware of that Washington case, right? Where we have a multi-million-dollar war. Most of the schools that have international travel are finding ways to incorporate some sort of international travel policy to provide the liability coverage for situations that happen abroad as well as the medical repatriation, kidnapping, and ransom. So we're seeing some of that. What we're trying to do is make sure that we have an adequate coverage individually for those people. Not everybody's involved in that. For those that do, we extremely understand.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Mark, has this group seen the cyber increase that was the focus of the earlier portion?
As far as participation by schools?
Claims or costs related to it?
It's,
We've had a situation where one of the schools was breached in the sense that they got the email from the president, and most of the people here probably heard this, the president and the head of the school sends the email to the business officer. In this particular case, they got into the outlook, so they knew where the president was, traveling in England. The email comes in and says, hey, I just arrived in England, and none of my credit cards are working. In fact, they don't even have me registered for the conference, and I can't check into my hotel. You need to wire money to the hotel. Here's the wiring instructions. She did. Right? So we've had some. We've had some other situations where they've had access to scheduling that might also include information about a child's education plan, an IEP. So we've had some small things. I think we're starting to see the ability to look at cyber. We've got a program that we're looking at right now that, early on, the cost for this was very high. We incorporated the cost for the deductible, kind of scratched your head saying, I got to pay a lot of money before it's ever going to stop. We've seen some shifting in that. The premiums are starting to come
covered at lower prices than they've ever been able to.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, we have that coverage. And so what's happened over the last few years is the questionnaire is more sophisticated as far as the renewal process. And that does two things. One, it gives the insurance companies greater information about how we're addressing the risk. But two, internally, it gives us food for thought and things that we need to address or make sure that we're addressing so that the risk is diminished. So, any other questions? Okay, great. Well, don't forget to pick up your dividend check. Thank you all for coming out, and safe travels, please.